All right, so state sales tax, we just had a nice long video explaining the options. But what if I'm an international seller? How does state sales tax come into play for international sellers?
So international sellers, sometimes it's great to be an international seller. If you're doing Amazon right, if you're structured right, and you're doing international sales right, you may actually be legally well within your rights under what are called tax treaties. And if you don't know what a tax treaty is, Google your country and a tax treaty like Australia, US tax treaty, and go and read it. In Article 5 of the tax treaty, we'll have discussion about what's called permanent establishment, which is sort of the nexus. And these are all great things that sort of determine whether or not you have an obligation to pay tax to the US government. A lot of times we have these treaties that say if you don't have this sort of international version of nexus called permanent establishment, you don't have to pay certain taxes. You're expected to pay tax to your home country, and so on and so forth. But the problem becomes that the tax treaties have been ruled by the Supreme Court as not basically being covered by the state. In other words, the states aren't bound by the tax treaties. And that unfortunately means that all of those protections at the federal level do nothing for you at the state level. Although I do think there's some challenges in the near future. That's not to say you don't have the same challenges and defenses that we've talked about in other videos about why sales tax is wrong. And like I said, thankfully, Amazon is going to be collecting sales tax in most states: California, October 1st, Texas, October 1st, Illinois, January 1st. I mean, a lot of the big states were going to be covered by Amazon. So for those purposes, hopefully this is all going away. But there's still that open risk out there about income tax and all these other things. And unfortunately, just as an FYI, the fact that you're a foreign seller, right, especially if you have a US LLC, you have assets in the US, you have a bank account in the US, you're still technically at risk, albeit though, from a personal asset perspective, probably in a better position if, God forbid, something were to go wrong and, somebody actually ended up going after you. But again, we're fighting that, and I'm positive we're going to get to a good and constitutional answer. But just in case you were wondering what the deal is with state taxes as a foreign seller, it's not the same as at the federal level, which is the IRS for my foreign seller friends.
So it depends on the treaty that your country has with the United States.
It does at that level, but not at the state level. The states don't care about the treaties. States don't think it matters. So, and the Supreme Court has backed them up on that. In other words, you might have to pay state income tax in theory. You could have to pay state income tax in a scenario where you don't have to pay federal income tax. That's a potential risk, right?
Okay. So there's state sales tax and there's state income tax.
Right.
So they have to collect both, potentially, maybe?
Potentially. I mean, again, see other video about why I think sales tax is wrong. But yeah, in theory, if I were a state right now, if I were the state, and speaking of the states, which I disagree with, and again, I fight states for a living. I've been fighting states for years. I win a lot. A big win in California with Microsoft not many, many years ago, as well as many others. But if I were a state government official, like in the state of California, if I were Nick Maduros, the head of the tax department in California, I would say that as a foreign seller with FBA, you would have to collect our sales tax until October 1st, pay our franchise tax perhaps, which is $800, although that's not his jurisdiction, and register with our Secretary of State. I mean, there's all these potential requirements that they might say you have to do, right? Because that's been the position of the states, that when you're doing business through FBA, you have the requisite nexus to allow a state to subject you to all of these taxes. Again, I think all very much subject to challenge, all very much not set in stone, but that's what the government's saying right now. So just be aware.
So that's their side of it.
Right. But to the extent you hear that and you say, well, I don't do business in the US because I have a tax treaty, that's certainly not a defense to that. Now, there are plenty of other defenses, and we've talked about them before, but the tax treaty one isn't going to come into play at anything state and local.
Okay. So both sides have an argument.
Yeah, it's just the court's just basically saying that a federal tax treaty has no bearing on the state. The state's free to do whatever they want. So even where the federal government, even where Congress has said, we're not going to tax you at the federal IRS level, the states don't have to play by those rules, which is crazy, but apparently is what the court's current interpretation is. I think it could be subject to change, properly challenged, but for now, that's just an FYI.
Okay, that is good to know. But it's always changing.
Right? But it's always changing, and I'm changing it. I mean, we've got a lot going on right now, and some exciting things that hopefully will be out there, and definitely want to come back and talk about soon. And then, but again, good news is the biggest tax risk for most businesses are related to sales tax. And if Amazon's collecting the sales tax going forward, then you've taken your biggest risk off. It's funny, you talk about states like Wyoming and no income tax. The thing is, though, if you're a foreign seller, it may pay to be incorporated in a no income tax state. But, again, the states may also say that anywhere you have an FBA warehouse. Certainly, if you're a foreign seller, no need to be a California company. That would probably be the last place I would want to be, that or New York, because then you're just opening yourself up for state income tax that you don't need to be paying. So, there the Wyoming or Delaware, those states might make more sense. So definitely get some good advice on that.
All right. Depending on your situation.
Depending on your situation. But yeah, and again, great news. Amazon collecting sales tax is going to be a huge burden off a lot of people. So now is a great time to start selling in the US. I don't want to sound like I'm discouraging anyone. Please come in. But I feel more people get tripped up listening to the software companies and just blindly registering everywhere. You just need good advice. It's just be wary of those like little things that, if you read somewhere about tax treaty, just know that states don't necessarily respect tax treaties.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions, let us know. If you need help, reach out to a professional. Paul is a professional. Any parting words or?
I don't really have any parting words, but just, don't be afraid to come over and do business here. It's a great time to be doing business in the US, and that's it.
All right, good. Well, go do business.
Yes, go do business.
Now we're happy because we just had this wonderful conversation. So
I feel that.